Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have two very special guests, returning guests. It's Tom and Brett from PsyOp Cinema. This will be our sixth show. I posted 5 other shows on different topics. The original interview we had was about kind of my work looking into the occult, and we also covered the ultra paranoid film Parallax View. We've covered Under the Silver Lake conspiracy theory. We did a show on the occult influence of Ed Sheeran and Bring Me the Horizon. And then I just posted something this week that I suggest people check out, which was an interview Tom had with a former member of Adam Waffen. He goes by Theodore, but you can kind of see how much he knew and how much some of the stuff that I wrote about, he confirmed and was aware of, and some of the murders and things like that. So I highly recommend people go check that out on William Ramsey Investigates, or you could go to PsyOp Cinema and check that out. But today, they joined me to talk about a movie and a book and an author who I'm interested in, always been interested in, very influential, especially the themes that he packs into his books and how his books became very popular as movie subjects after his death. And one of my favorite movies is Blade Runner, based upon To Android's Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. But we're going to talk about A Scanner Darkly. And I titled this Philip K. Dick and Richard Linklater's A Scanner Darkly with Tom and Brett of PsyOp Cinema. So we're going to also analyze the film as well as the book and the author. And also found it interesting, this kind of title is taken from 1 Corinthians, and it's quoted. 1 Corinthians is actually quoted a couple times throughout the book and film, but the full line from 1 Corinthians is, "For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. And I know in part, but then shall I know, even as I also am known." And so it's The Scanner Darkly is a play on that, a glass darkly, a modern kind of take. And so there's a lot to talk about. The book was originally published in 1977. But in the book, the activities take place in the future, like 20 years in the future in Orange County. It goes through a lot of drug use, but I think there's a lot of themes and a lot of important things that Philip K. Dick packed into the book, as well as Linklater into the movie. But Tom and Brett can talk more about that as well. So Tom and Brett, welcome back to the show.
Hey, great to be here.
Yeah, always fun to talk to William.
Yeah, likewise. I was really looking forward to this topic and these character actors, and there's a lot to kind of unpack with all these people. Even Alex Jones pops up in A Scanner Darkly. I mean, who wants to start? Which one of you wants to start and kind of give some first impressions of the film and book?
Brett, do you want to go ahead with this one?
Yeah, I'll go ahead with it. My first impressions of the film were, well, I mean, Richard Linklater's work, which we'll give a little bit of background on Linklater in a bit, but I mean, I think his work just kind of gets sort of increasingly soulless after, waking life. He's no longer this sort of humanistic indie director. His work, it's this pattern we've found with other directors we've analyzed, like Christopher Nolan, with these maverick directors become part of the Hollywood establishment, and they start to kind of take on the deranged worldview of the Hollywood establishment. And Philip K. Dick cannot just be equated with that establishment, but Dick has been very useful, I think, to a lot of anti-humanists out there. So it's a dreary movie. It is, I mean, I tried to watch it a couple of times before and turned it off because of the bug dope psychosis triggering stuff at the beginning, which is an info hazard. There's a few other ones in this movie. It was watchable, but basically pretty mediocre as a film. The messaging, which we're going to discuss at length, I think is basically dark and anti-human. So those are my first impressions.
Yeah, Brett, I totally agree. I mean, I find PKD and Linklater to both be frustratingly mixed bags, who obviously have a lot to recommend to them both. With Philip K. Dick, I think I agree that I see him more as a tragic figure than a malevolent one. Obviously, like the film adaptations of his work and his work itself have just been a magnet for people interested in any of these kind of parapolitical themes or the paranormal itself, all these dystopian ideas and all of that. I've never been somebody who's been a huge PKD fanboy, but he's always been just kind of around the cultural sectors that I've that I've been interested in, and I don't at this point view him as somebody who is actively taking on a full role of just kind of countercultural false prophet and all of that. He's not a Robert Anton Wilson or Terrence McKenna, and I think he should be distinguished from those types. But ultimately, I do see him very much as a victim of the MK culture, and you see that to different degrees in his works, both in his written work and in film adaptations of that. And as we can get into, especially as things about the ending, things that happen in the last act of this film, it really just does seem like the desperate plea for justification of somebody who was victimized by the different aspects of the emerging reign of drug culture and surveillance culture and all of these things that Dick had such a clear and visceral view of. And Linklater also, this movie kind of it kind of bummed me out that Linklater directed something this deeply unpleasant. Somebody who was previously fixated on ideas involving occultism and the paranormal and all of that in very, very unhealthy ways. Just like seeing the kind of fetishization of these kind of schizo-paranoid thought loops and their interactions with drugs and technology is very hard to watch. And I know Linklater said about the film that he's very much not that he's not trying to glorify drug use. He was trying to show a nuanced version of it, that there's these jovial kind of familial moments, but he's trying to do a cautionary tale, but still, just by virtue of this being a movie and it trying to entertain and its subject matter, it is still trying to suck the audience into the fun of getting lost in all of these loops and layers. And I just have somewhat of a positive impression of Linklater, of just enjoy, not necessarily his worldview or anything, but just enjoying his style. We talked about Slacker some when we were on the show last time, and I found that to be a very enjoyable watch. And just looking at the trajectory of Linklater's career, I'm not sure entirely if I agree that he lost the kind of the kind of indie humanistic spark that he used to have after he did Waking Life. When you think about some of his more recent films, or at least recent in the sense of over the last 10 years or so, you can see that he kind of goes back to at least trying to do that kind of thing after A Scanner Darkly, with material like, of course, Boyhood is very, very well known. Or even there's Everybody Wants Some, I think 2016, I think that one came out. Just another slice of life movie about a college baseball team's first weekend at school, and just very, very pleasant. And so to think about the resonance between like why Linklater was attracted to the kind of very dark satire and dystopian writing that Dick is doing here. I think that that's interesting, and I can say more about this, but when I began to think a little bit more deeply about some other Linklater material as of late, I realized that, like, okay, I don't think he's a malicious person himself, certainly not compared to a lot of Hollywood filmmakers, but you can see kind of these MK culture themes penetrating into that. And I think that becomes less surprising after considering that he made A Scanner Darkly.
Right. I mean, it is an interesting film. And these are all first-rate actors. I mean, I think even back then in 2006, when this came out, or, around that time, these guys were all known figures, all came together to make this, what was an independent film, a smaller film. This is obviously not a big screen film. It is interesting that they all said okay to this. Don't you think?
Well, so you have to look at the production team that's behind it, and begin with the executive producers, George Clooney and Steven Soderbergh, who are both, it's no secret, I mean, they're both deep state assets. It appears that you have some people that had been part of Linklater's production teams in the past, people associated with Keanu Reeves, and then you had Clooney and Soderbergh and their operation kind of came together. So yeah, between all of that, he had access to top flight actors, and Linklater has since the 90s had that access to Erwin Stoff, who is there's a whole bunch of producers. It's one of those. It's kind of more like a movie that's been made in the last 5 years or so, where you have like all these like endless production screens at the beginning and endless lists of producers. Like we did Under the Silver Lake, I missed that Sam Lufty, Britney Spears' handler, was one of the executive producers, because there were just so many of these producers. But Erwin Stoff is one of them. He was an executive producer on The Matrix. And he's worked with Doug Lehman, who's also a deep state asset, whose father was a Fed lawyer who actually served as chief counsel during Iran-Contra. Tony Pallotta is one of the producers, does a lot of transhumanist stuff. So yeah, looking at the production background of this, I think is telling, and it makes a lot of sense how I was able to get all these big actors. And then, I mean, a lot of these actors they're big actors, but they're really not very inspired here. And I think Harrelson is just really miscast, altogether.
The one thing that ties all of them together is drugs, right? This whole topic of this kind of Scanner Dark is the drug culture, and they've all been entrenched in it. I'm not sure about Winona as much, but I thought she did have one. But these guys go back to a lot of. I mean, what did Downey famously said? He said, "What was it? It's like I've got a shotgun in my mouth with my finger on the trigger, and I like the taste of the gunmetal." Like that's how he was in and out of court, if you remember. So,
yeah, isn't it fascinating, the transformation of Robert Downey Jr. from, several transformations, from the Brat Pack kid to Academy Award winner
into
zero,
right?
Total tabloid. Yeah, Less Than Zero, right? From the great, actually very good film. And then so he became a total tabloid figure, Junior in the 90s, and that was the peak of it, when he was like asking to go back to, he basically said, I have a suicidal attachment to drugs. That's another. So his father, Robert Downey Sr., who's a director who was very much entrenched in the counterculture in the 60s, and I mean, admitted, they gave him, weed when he was like 11 years old and stuff. Like, we just thought this was okay, and he's actually been very honest about it, Robert Downey Sr., about how they like gave him drugs when he was a kid. Robert Downey Jr.
Right, and that ties them to Philip K. Dick, a massive drug taker who said that this was all something he experienced in California. So and that's really the kind of, you want to talk about a PsyOp theme, the circular PsyOp theme is this: why are people attracted to drugs? Who's pushing the drugs? And then, I mean, I don't want to ruin the end of the film, but it's one big cycle. It's the drug cycle of surveillance and state power and state punishment. And where's it coming from, right? Where's all this stuff coming? It's really interesting, I think, when you look at these guys' real backgrounds and the books and the film that they made.
Yeah, very much so. And just one other interesting note about people involved with the production of the movie. Obviously there's the rotoscoping animation style, which really makes it stand out, which Linklater also employed with Waking Life. In addition to having people on this who were involved with that project, animators involved with this film, and it would go on to be involved with I think Minnow Mountain is the name of the animation company, and involved with interesting projects, irrelevant looking projects that I guess there's this adult animation series, which I have not seen, but Undone, which is apparently a typical thing about trauma of a car accident, unlocking paranormal abilities involving time travel and that kind of thing. They involved with Tower, I guess, an animated film about the 1966 Austin Clock Tower shooting, which that one kind of stands out in my mind, just because one interesting thing about that event is Whitley Strieber never being able to quite decide whether he was there or not, or if it was a screen memory or something like that. Just for those who follow Strieber's writings, that something comes up over the years as different interpretations of him having said for years that he was there and changing his mind repeatedly. And then also animators involved with a recent Richard Linklater movie, which I haven't seen, which is called Apollo 10.5. I don't know if either of you are familiar with this one, but it's basically inspired by his own upbringing in Houston, but with the conceit of a child who's been sent on a space mission and secretly being trained by NASA to go into space, combined with his very kind of just nostalgic, vignette style of filmmaking about different aspects of his childhood there. So a child being shot into space on behalf of NASA certainly is a bit of a red flag for me. So so the animators involved with this film were also involved with all of those projects.
Oh, interesting. And I found out Winona, his writer, when she had her shoplifting arrest, she had 8 prescriptions for painkillers. So they've all had drug histories. And most notably, Reeves was friends with River Phoenix when River Phoenix, quote, overdosed or whatever happened to him. But they were like garbage heads back in the day. So you can see why they would be interested in attaching themselves to a project with these themes.
Yeah, and Harrelson, just for people that don't know his association with drugs, he's been a big marijuana advocate, pro-marijuana advocate for quite some time, for a few decades. And I would also add that he is the son of Charles Harrelson, who was executed for killing a federal judge, and who threatened, both when he was being arrested and in prison, to reveal stuff about his role in the Kennedy assassination. And then shortly after he's executed, Woody Harrelson gets, I believe I have the timeline correct, and shortly after that, he suddenly gets this role in Cheers as Woody.
Interesting. Yeah, and Harrelson, he was a hitman, so it wasn't his first kill. He was like the old Texas.
Yeah, he was a contract killer for the deep state. I mean, that's what he was.
Yeah, no doubt.
And I'm sorry, Woody has also said on camera that his father was in the CIA, or he's said that he's said it without saying it, so to speak. If you watch the interview, yeah, he strongly implies that his father was in the CIA.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
And since you mentioned, River Phoenix, that's of course just an interesting figure in relation, of course, to Joaquin Phoenix, who we've thought about in relation to our Joker studies, and we'll be thinking about a lot more. And I don't know if you had a chance to hear our Jared Leto episode that we did recently, but Leto, at one point, when talking about his habit of making up details about his life to confuse the press to be more interesting, cited River Phoenix as an inspiration for that. So River tends to show up in some interesting places.
Yeah, interesting. So they were together. I think it was Keanu Reeves, and they were in My Own Private Idaho, right? Wasn't that kind of like a gay themed film, if I remember?
Is Gus Van Sant? Is there some?
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember if it had the gay. I think there might have been. It's about street. It was about street people and Drugstore Cowboy. He did that kind of pair of films, and it was River Phoenix and Keanu Reeves in My Own Private Idaho.
Right. So but one of the things that's different in the book, I didn't know there were that many quotes from German. Like I saw just many German quotes. I was kind of going through and trying to figure that out. So he's quoting from Faust and from Goethe in the book that didn't make it into the film. I found that interesting. He's a little bit more culturally astute than what comes across in the film. Although in the film there was other quotes from First Corinthians at one point. Forgot what he says. Oh, he says death is swallowed up in victory is what at the very end, near the very end, Keanu Reeves states that, which is 1 Corinthians 15. But,
right. Right. And then, of course, that I think is a really important thing to consider about PKD in general. Is it's something that both detractors and PKD boosters, or even worshipers to a certain degree, often talk the trash stratum of culture. Quote from Valis, about PKD finding symbols of the divine in just the lowest aspects of culture. And that can be read in a very positive way. It can be dismissed in a very superficial way, but also I think it can be very destructively read in a positive sense, in a way that can get people trapped in that trash stratum, just like looking for the divine when the divine can be found in much better places. And I think that, I think that someone like Philip K. Dick, he's not entirely wrong to say that remarkable synchronicities and precognitions can be found when delving through that aspect of culture, those trashier aspects of human existence. I just don't necessarily think that that's a good thing. I don't think that these things necessarily are signposts along the road towards spiritual wisdom or anything like that. These can be traps for spiritual delusion. And I think PKD, unlike other major figures in this kind of countercultural set of figures, I think PKD is earnestly trying to get out of that and earnestly trying to avoid those traps. I just don't necessarily think he entirely succeeds, and I think that this movie is a pretty stark example of that. So I guess I'll warn the audience, for spoilers, because I can't really dissect some of the most important aspects of this movie without getting into how this ends. But I think that there's a few key scenes that really show what's going on here. One of them being the one with the kind of inner monologue where where the scanner darkly thing comes from. But I guess it's but thinking about the role of these agents who turn out to be fighting the new path at the end, I think is really key to understanding what's going on here. So you have the new path this corporation that I think they're first mentioned in the film at this this Brown Bear Lodge meeting. They're being called their sponsor for this lodge that the Keanu character is speaking to in his disguised suit, that he's just switching identities every fraction of a second so no one can tell who he is. And then there's this really important, subtle, again, there's some, I don't love this movie. I certainly don't love this movie on a thematic level. I don't love it aesthetically either, but there are some very, very clever scenes in just terms of how subtle but effective they are. And one is when Fred, the Keanu character, when he, in his role in this kind of law enforcement, this drug enforcement individual, not as Bob Arctor, who he is when he's in the drug house with the other characters. So Fred is talking to his supervisor Hank. Neither of them know who the true identity of the other ones, and then he's complaining about how the new path has this privileged place in society. They're the one place in the country that's not subject to this surveillance. They can't be scanned, he says. And his supervisor, Hank, who we later find out to be to be one of the supposed white hats who's actually fighting New Path, pretends to dismiss his concerns and says it's just their contract with the government. And then it's implied, but it's not actually shown, I think that's very clever, that Hank, who has given Fred Keanu the idea that a dealer might be hiding there at New Path. So the idea has been incepted into Bob Arctor, Fred Keanu's head that New Path might be worth investigating. That at their facilities, the dealers might be hiding. And now at the end of the movie, we find out that that the Keanu character's mind has purposefully been destroyed by drugs. He's been made to be addicted, precisely so that these white hats in the system who are secretly fighting New Path can send him to that facility to gather evidence. So that's so there that earlier scene of Fred and Hank talking, and this movie's hard to summarize because of how purposely convoluted it is really key to to setting up the ending. So we find out later that that Hank, also in the movie Donna, is working with this other officer, Mike, and they're portrayed, and this is toward the very end, and this is portrayed very much like these are benevolent people. This is part of a good conspiracy within the very sinister surveillance apparatus, and it's meant to expose this evil corporation that is both propagating the drug war and the drugs themselves, that is perpetrating the cycle that all the characters, especially Bob Arctor, Keanu, Fred, are all caught up in. And then, but I think the really, really evil thing about this messaging is that these supposed white hats are, within the text of the film, very explicitly also perpetrating the cycle. It's just because they got Bob addicted, and then they gaslight him to tell him, oh, it was just purely your own decision, so that they could send him on this mission. And then at the very end of the movie, that's vindicated, because you have him picking up the flower that shows where the substance death drug comes from, and pocketing it so he can give it to his friends, basically his handlers, his white hat agents on Thanksgiving. So also fortuitous timing to record this episode, given Thanksgiving is coming up so soon, and the end of this movie is about is basically about Keanu's going to expose the conspiracy on Thanksgiving. So so there's a lot that can be said there, and I'm interested in either your thoughts. I have more thoughts on how a couple scenes really draw out this point, but basically the message of the movie is that he's caught in this endless cycle of this corporation, running both sides of the drug war and drug production. But thankfully, there are good agents, white hats, who are controlling him, who destroy his mind for a good purpose, and they have their own kind of Gnostic justification that we can talk about. But it's actually very similar, I think, to conspiracy theory, which we talked about when we were on last time. It's darker, much darker on a superficial tone level than that movie, but it's the same ending. Our protagonist got his good handlers. He's no longer being controlled by the bad handlers. He's found the good ones who have destroyed his mind for a positive purpose, and everything will be all right.
Yeah, I think you keyed into that whole cyclical thing, and I think that's what Dick is trying to capture originally, is this whole the whole problem, which is still extant today, of the cyclical nature of the drugs, where the state actually could be the one involved, or some creepy third party, and keeping this whole paranoiac police state structure, political and legal structure, intact, right? So they're all caught up in it. She's in it, he's in it, even Downey's character, right? So they're all either getting arrested or thrown in jail or investigated. So they're all caught up in it, whether they like it or not. And all of the concomitant paranoia and panopticon searching that they're doing, watching each other, creates this whole atmosphere of suspicion. And I think that's in that drug life. That's what I think he captured it right. I think it's still happening today. Anybody who's involved in pharmaceutical trade, opioids, it's very strange, because the government allows a lot of these things to happen. And you can look at the opioid crisis. Like, the government didn't deregulate and didn't harass these people for years and cause death, right? But also people going to jail and not really being handled. You don't really see these people being reached out to solve their problem in a functional way, right? It's like, you got to go back through the system. You got to be churned through the system, and that's how it ends, right? That's the full revelation of Keanu Reeves' character, as he finds out that New Path are the producers, right?
Yeah, and the movie reveals the process by which he's inducted, into the into the system. To me, the two big themes of the movie are the drug war PsyOp and what I call mass intelligence culture, which is just a sort of mainstreaming of intelligence culture and sort of conscripting the population through Hollywood and other things into basically being or accepting the values of intelligence culture and so on. Now, within the sort of drug war PsyOp angle of it, the mechanism that's being used corresponds to exactly what we on PsyOp Cinema call red pill, programming. It's something I've explained, at some length. But substance D, which is the name of the drug that they say 25% of the population is addicted to by then, it's literally a red pill. And I'll quote IMDb here to show the further connections to PK Dick and the red pill. But some user on IMDb wrote, the red pill is known as substance death, a drug that alters a user's reality, bear a striking resemblance to the red pills given to the character Douglas Quaid in the film Total Recall, 1990, that in this instance are used to bring Quaid out of the recall memory implant induced reality. If you watch the movie, it's kind of confusing because you don't know whether the red pill is being told it's going to free you from this false reality, but it's not clear whether it's bringing him into a second matrix, as Jason Horsey would call it, into a more.
And Total Recall is based on a Philip K. Dick book too, right?
Precisely. So Philip K. Dick is somehow at the ground floor of this red pill thing, and I might have explained this to you listeners before.
Prior to the Matrix, right? Matrix was 1999. Sorry.
Exactly. All that's prior to the Matrix. And I always have to give a little bit more of the background now that we brought up Total Recall. But before Total Recall in 1989, Charles Manson gave this interview with Geraldo Rivera in which he uses this term or this red pill trope. He refers to it with like precisely the same meaning. He's asked by Geraldo, like, why is there like so much violence and murder in society? And he says, and he's basically saying, you're causing it by showing it to them and making it edgy and cool. And he says, they didn't know what the red pill was until you told them not to take it. So it's the red pill is the red apple, right? It's the fruit in the garden it's the forbidden fruit, right? So, and so what red pill programming is this reverse psychology. It's holding up this red fruit, which is what you want somebody to go for. And you say, kind of like Dirty, or kind of like, what's his name? Jack Palance and Shane, pick up the gun, pick it up, just daring you. It's really powerful, but of course it's a trap, essentially. So in this movie, it's like drug enforcement has just become the justification for the total militarization of the police, the endless expansion of police powers, total surveillance state, with this like highly compartmentalized information system. And in this opening scene, Keanu, that the one Thomas was describing at the lodge, the Bear Lodge, Keanu is supposed to read this script, and he's inside of the scramble suit, and he's reading the script. And at one point, he just balks and he won't read anymore. It's where he's like supposed to be threatening the drug pushers with retribution, And he says, this is the kind of stuff that gets people on drugs. You have it right there in the first scene. And first scenes are very important in establishing the kind of thematic outlook, a constellation of the film. And you have red pill programming being defined right there. So yeah, he gets it. They're trying to get people on drugs. That's where you also hear that new path recovery is hooked into the system, and they're exempt from surveillance. Why are they exempt from surveillance? Because they're creating the drugs that create the problems that justify the expansion of the police state. And this brings in Alex Jones, right? Because the voice of wisdom here is not really Keanu, it's Alex Jones, and he's kind of this voice in the wilderness on the street with a megaphone telling everybody that yeah, substance D is bad news, but so is the drug war. And where did it come from? Of course, it came from a biolab. But it's Jones here who sees, like, he's seeing beyond that dialectic of red pill programming, the transgressive freedom, like you can break the rules and be free, or be oppressed, or the oppressive conformity. And that's what happens with Keanu, right? He has a family life, but it's just really oppressive and dull and stultifying, and so he wants to break out of it. And this gets him, he takes the red pill, which here, right, is intelligence work as well as substance D. It sort of, the idea of red pill program is it sort of unleashes the erotic energy, and then that kind of undirected eros that they're claiming is freedom ends up just being manipulated and then channeled and always, and then you can be blackmailed with it, right? So that justifies the expansion of state powers. But Thomas mentioned how the process too of the gaslighting that goes on, and I mean, there's like direct reference, and that's in Dick too. Like, I haven't read this novel, but I have read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and several other Dick novels, and they actually reference Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep when the psychology people are doing their tests on him. There's the name of the laptop has a reference to the test they use to distinguish between humans and androids, which is kind of a behavioral modification control device. Actually, it's a sort of Scientology thing. So you see they're using that. They tell him, like, he wants to get a gift for Donna, and she tells him it's obviously a sort of hypnotic suggestion. She tells him to go get her a blue flower. The blue flowers being the source of this is, like, I call it high intensity red pill programming. I mean, I think in low intensity is what you see through the sexual revolution and stuff, but what you see what they're doing to Keanu, you could call it like high intensity red pill programming, I would call it. And so I could say a whole bunch of things about the intelligence culture aspect of it, but those are kind of my big thoughts on the drug war side and what it's revealing about the mechanism of how this works.
Right. I mean, it's they're caught up and they become pawns in that larger mechanism, right? So that's his job, but he's also a user who goes through the whole process to new path. And it's interesting you bring up Scientology, because Dick was in something like that was called Ex-Calais, where for his treatment, he was trying to get treated too. So there's like tie-ins from reality into this fictional narrative too of him. And it's interesting too, because they compared what Dick was into Synanon and the guy who I talked to who litigated against Synanon, and they sent a snake and put it into his post office box, and he got bit. His name is Paul Morantz. He just recently passed away. So that was back in October last month, and you can listen to a 3-hour interview with him. But he knew this guy from Synanon very well. So that environment of New Path, which also reminded me of kind of World Vision too. It had a World Visionist kind of feel, Scientology feel, where you have these, suited people within there who spout aphorisms and things like that, and supposedly there to help you. And that's where Keanu gets dropped off there at the end, right? He gets dropped off after he's having his overdose or breakdown or whatever. And I think that they captured that kind of thing that was happening in the 70s too. There were all kinds of weird drug helpmen. I can't remember some of them. Synanon was one of them. There were other ones. Narconon. There were all these things back then, 50 years ago, to help people get through whatever their addictive behavior was. And it just all became part of the system, all become this circular flat circle of these people never getting out, going from addiction to rehab to addiction, and having these huge administrative bodies or intelligence, like you said, or the police state justifying itself by something that they want to actually maintain instead of actually end or cure. And I think that goes to the present day.
Absolutely, it does for sure. And I think one thing that's really tragic here is, so you have you have like the text on screen from the end of at the end of the film, which is taken from the author's note that ends the novel, where you have PK Dick just talking about basically these people that he knew who were victims of drug use, who were punished far more than they deserved for their mistakes, he says. And it's just this very mournful tone. And he includes this list of names, including Phil, which I think is just him including himself on there, with physical or psychological damage that they have from their drug use. And so a lot of this is definitely PK trying to make sense of this, of what happened to him and what happened to others. But when I say earlier about there being this kind of pleading nature for justification at the end, it's that it's interesting because of this very dark, paranoid, Gnostic view of reality that we're getting here. There is no way out. It's just the circles that continually connect back into themselves, either on a social level with the drug war historical dynamics that you're describing, or on a psychological level through these people's different delusions, which are taken very literally in the movie, through the ambiguity of identity and the shifting nature of that through hallucinations, where people are pretending to be other people, or all of those things. But I think that there's a couple scenes that really are necessary to think about to understand exactly what's going on in the ending. And I think that one of them is the scene where Keanu is talking about the scanners, where he says, "Whatever's watching, it's not human. What does a scanner see? Does it see into me, into us, clearly or darkly? I hope it sees clearly, because I can't any longer see into myself. I see only murk. I hope for everyone's sake the scanners do better, because if the scanner sees only darkly the way I do, then I'm cursed and cursed again, and will only wind up dead this way, knowing very little and getting that little fragment wrong too." So at that point in the movie, the Bob Archer character, Keanu, he's so lost into his drug use and his roles. He's the informant in the house, but he's paranoid about the informant in the house because he doesn't remember that that's him and all of that. And I did find some of those aspects of the film amusing, in spite of myself, in spite of just being so horrified by everything being portrayed. And so what is he hoping for there? He hopes that the scanners do better. This kind of surveillance tech, espionage laden drug culture, this PKD world. He's hoping that because his own mind is so fractured, he's just become so paranoid and schizo, and as just the MK culture has just destroyed any sense of self because of the red pill programming that Brett was describing that he's been subjected to. He can only hope that the scanners do a better job. He hopes that there's some kind of wisdom behind these endless cycles of government machinations and drug hallucinations that he's been subjected to. And then so I think that that's a very, very key set of lines in the movie. And then later on, when we find out that the other character in the house that he's making romantic overtures to that are being rejected, Donna, that actually is his boss, Hank, because again, these people in their drug enforcement capacity as those officers, they don't know who the other one is. We find out that that's been her all along. After he explicitly, like we're talking about, gaslights him, and it's really hard to watch him telling him, Hank, quote unquote, telling Fred, quote unquote, that no one held a gun to your head, you did this to yourself. And then, like in another couple scenes, when Donna, I guess real name Audrey, is talking to Mike, again the two white hat agents, they're openly talking about, oh, we did this to him, but it was for a greater cause. And right before she kind of dumps him into the place that's going to take him to the New Path facility, she gives him these lines saying that there'll be a recognition and some spark in a disguised form that will reveal itself to you and guide you. So this very Gnostic language, this divine spark disguised in himself underneath all these layers and layers of social and psychological and perhaps metaphysical deception. She's telling him, like, that's still in you, But basically, it's so cynical because that's his handler. That's the person who has participated in the wholesale destruction of his body and mind, giving him this language of, you're on this Gnostic mission. And I think that that's very telling there about a lot of people who get involved in these kind of ideas, who think they're on that kind of Gnostic mission. They're just being manipulated and controlled and led into these dissociative delusions, which is, of course, a very big theme of PsyOp cinema and what Brett and I talk about on our show. But then also very telling, in addition to that Gnostic language after the gaslighting scene, is that when Audrey and Mike, two white hats, are talking, she expresses doubt about the obviously incredibly morally dubious, to put it mildly, strategies that they're taking here and destroying Bob's mind to make him a spy for them at the New Path facility. And then Mike tells her that God's MO is to transmute evil into good, and that the whole process is hidden beneath the surface of our reality. It will only be revealed later. And even then, the people of the future, our children's children, will never know this awful time that we've gone through and the losses we took. Well, maybe some footnote in a minor history book, a brief mention with no list of the fallen. And so that's important for a couple reasons. One is that, again, it's total justification. It's the idea of PKD just really putting himself into this character and helping, like, this was done to me for a reason. I've tragically lost my mind to drugs and to getting lost in all these Gnostic loops of my cultural exploration. But maybe throughout all of these layers, one of them was a good one, and this had to happen to me for a reason. He just can't quite bring himself to see the full tragedy of this, and that it's not a good thing to be traumatized, to be a secret agent or a superhero, like we talk about on the show all the time. But like, maybe the people who did this to me were part of this greater Gnostic purpose. But then also notice Mike's mention of a list of the fallen. That maybe will be in some footnote in a minor history book. A brief mention with no list of the fallen is the end of his lines to Audrey. And then, of course, just a couple scenes later, we do get a list of the fallen. That's the end of the movie. And so I think the audience is supposed to unconsciously see that and be gratified by it. Be like, wow, this movie it's so good that this movie exists, because it's doing what the characters had hoped would happen, but thought would never happen, that there would actually, the stories of these heroes would be told, these heroes being these drug addicts destroyed by MK culture. So for both the movie and the book, there's this kind of self-justification, this glorification of the idea that this is that the film and book themselves are part of this positive Gnostic purpose of this plan within the system that's participating in all this delusion and schizo stuff and paranoia and drug use, but you're on a mission. And you as the audience now are kind of being recruited for that because you've borne witness to that and you've seen that. So despite all the cautionary tale aspects and however well-meaning PKD was, and I think he very much was as a person overall, maybe this particular work is more dubious. Ultimately, I think that this movie is just it's a complete failure to escape the second Matrix.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Gnosticism because Dick mentions Tyler D. Chardon in there, and they have quotes. I think the Barris character. I don't think he said it in the movie, and I couldn't watch the movie too, all of its in entirety, Brett. I had to take it in little 20-minute snippets, but he does talk. I mean, Barris, the character, talks about Christ everywhere present and everywhere growing more great. Christ, the final determination and plasmatic principle of the universe. And then Arctur says, what is that? And he says, Chardon, Tyler D. Chardon. So it's interesting that he puts it. And that's actually one element of Dick that I find fascinating is his theological bent. He definitely has a kind of, biblical view in some of his views. They're there. And it's there in this book at the very end. This creep from New Path says to Arctur, this isn't your God anymore, though it once was. So he's imputing to Arctur that his real God was this drug, death, or whatever they call it, more ontologia.
Yeah, so you might say that following what Dick called the 2374 experience, meaning February and March of 1974, this like string of altered state mystical experiences that he had that had a very Gnostic content. I mean, all of his work from then on, it's and this book, by the way, was written, I think, or that was conceived and written kind of before this. But all that later work, you could say, is a kind of theosophy, not necessarily in the technical, like Blavatsky sense, but it's a kind of theology, right? And with Chardin and some of this stuff, this is kind of this is a really big subject, but I don't think Dick is as I mean, our the kind of spiritual outlook of Hollywood is Gnostic. Okay, first of all, so I mean, Richard Stanley has said that the secret religion of Hollywood is Gnosticism, and beginning the late '90s, you have it kicking into high gear, this Gnostic worldview, which is on display here. I'll say a few more things about it, but I mean, so Dick is an important contributor to this, but you have to make certain distinctions between Dick's Gnosticism and, well, the ancient Gnostics on the one hand, and also the kind of pop Gnosticism or neo-Gnosticism. And so typically in the Gnostic systems, the creator, the controller, is not really God and is usually really bad and evil, and is all about power and control and creating simulated realities to get you stuck in. But Dick, this is not Dick's view. His view is that the creator is actually good, and he has this very complicated principle of entropy, basically kind of spiritual entropy that happens, but through kind of miraculous means, the creator re-enters the creation and I'm thinking of Scott Bakula in Quantum Leap and sets right what once went wrong. And that is his view, but it's Gnostic in endless numbers of ways. I mean, it involves sort of inversion, right? It involves flipping reality back over, and it involves, but basically with Dick, so he wrote this gigantic, his largest work is called The Exegesis. And it is, I have the published copy. I mean, it's a doorstopper. It's like what's published is like 1,500 pages, and that's by no means all of it. It's basically a bunch of diary entries where he's trying to interpret the experiences of 2374 that inspire all of his later work. And he goes through all kinds of, everything from sort of paranoid explanations of Soviet weapons beamed at him, to the CIA, to all kinds of, then he gets into various kinds of spiritual speculation, and it never really ends. He just keeps kind of sifting through. It's very open-ended. He never can come to any kind of conclusion, but he's convinced of sort of that he's gotten this mystical download of sort of the truth of whatever the parts of the Bible that Gnostics want. I mean, that's part of Gnosticism. It's a kind of, you have the Gnostic downloads. You can go grab sacred scriptures and you recognize what's true and what was inserted by blue meanies. And so he was definitely that kind of exegete, his exegesis. So that's where a lot of the biblical stuff comes in. That's where a lot of the, I mean, some of those, I mean, all of those references are not theologically correct. Some of them are worse, than others. Basically, that's what I can say about that aspect of it. But what's going on in the movie to me is like that it's a complementarity between the Gnosticism we're talking about, and Dick, by the way, also his simulation hypothesis thing that's gotten so faddish. I mean, he practically inaugurated that at a sci-fi conference in the 70s when he gave this speech saying that he'd figured out that we're all in a simulation. That was very much a part of the content. So this isn't the real world, it's fake world. It's probably a computer-generated world. Science fiction too, about sort of taking religious things and putting them into the register of scientism and science fiction and things. I mean, but in this movie, like that, the intelligence culture like very much complements that, because what it's saying is like even the best of us can't get out of it. So the good guys are also basically making Manchurian candidates to infiltrate the bad guys, and they're all playing the same games. And you just have to hope that the good will somehow come out of it, because but it's what you really have is this disorienting, ontologically and morally disoriented, because if you don't know what's really going on in reality, like how do you even evaluate, okay, maybe it's okay to create Manchurian candidates, or maybe that's just that's how the deck is stacked, so just these, nested rings of intrigue and deception and disorientation. And what I'll say for the movie is it doesn't glamorize intelligence culture. It's kind of like The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. That way I'll give that movie, like, it doesn't make it sexy, it doesn't make it cool, but it does say there's no way out of it, basically. So it's I guess it's blackpilling people in that way.
Yeah, I agree. It's very drab. It's very intrusive. So it's not something cool. And it also, like, the intelligence, the insight is like they're insight. There's a lot of epistemology in the book and the movie, but it's like you're looking into that, and then you're looking into you. And then Bob asks, who's Bob Arctur? That's you. So the kind of like loses his, individuality in this whole system too, which is kind of strange. But there also is a mention in the book that I found interesting was Tim Leary, who is the godfather of Winona Ryder, and who was at the front end of this whole kind of drug use for, he definitely had a Gnostic view of reality, but drug use as a positive to create enlightenment or find God or being spiritual, right? Which I think in this book, that is not reflected in this book at all. They're on drugs, but they are not finding some type of enlightenment through the use. They're finding kind of a relief from the drabbiness, don't you think? Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that. I mean, I think that PKD's attunement to the real darkness and tragedy of what's going on in a lot of ways saves this work and a lot of his work from being, I think, more PsyOp-y than they could be. I could imagine an alternate timeline, to use a very PKD mode of thinking, but an alternate timeline in which if he was less damaged as a person and therefore less almost obsessively introspective and less lost in the Gnostic labyrinth of his own mind and his own kind of obsessive evaluation and reevaluation of metaphysics and his own spiritual experiences, if he was a little bit more coherent, he might have had the hubris that could have allowed him to be a more sinister figure in line with some of the other cultural counter figures I mentioned, or even perhaps an L. Ron Hubbard type or something like that. And presumably one can imagine another alternate timeline in which our culture wasn't so pathological, in which neither would Dick's work have to reflect such pathology. But I do think it is kind of a middle way in here where it's blackpilling, as Brett said. It's not. It's Dick. It wasn't transformed into being a true agent of MK culture, but really there was also seemed like there was no real way out for him. And I think that's the role of Gnosticism is very important in relation to what we think of as the second matrix that we talk about a lot on the show. This concept that we get from Jason Horsley, and there's so much of conspiracy culture that it's caught up in these Gnostic ideas of the second matrix. I mean, obviously, a very dramatic example of that is something like QAnon, but then there are plenty of other more canonical examples within conspiracy literature as well that I think reflect those same tendencies. And it's such a subtle thing, because with Gnosticism isn't per se what I would identify as the Luciferian religion of the future, but it's just one tool in the toolkit of our cultural engineers, and it's a very powerful one, because it can just entrap so many people who catch on to the fact that blue pill consensus reality just isn't tenable, or that there are cultural engineers or anything like that. But then by punting to this reality of absolute deception, which there's no way out aside from maybe perhaps your inner spark of divinity, it neutralizes you from ever actually finding paths to actual foundational truth that could free you from MK culture. And so I think that you see a lot of those complexities with PKD, with his sometimes very silly and sometimes interesting if dangerous and sometimes insightful musings on metaphysics and his spiritual experiences, with his oscillation between Christian and Gnostic language. And all of that. I mean, it stands out to me some of these things about him, just the way that his kind of preoccupation with manifestations of the divine feminine, I think shows some real danger there, because I think that, as I've said on PsyOp Cinema many times, the religion of the future is in many ways a dark religion of the divine feminine. So the idea of Valis as being associated with this kind of AI, pure rational feminine consciousness, some red flags there. His in terms of PKD's own psychic fracture, that was his one idea that he was also a first century Christian named Thomas. I think is interesting. Thomas twin, he literally twinned into this other Thomas from the first century. So there's that.
Wasn't it? Sorry to interrupt, but wasn't it the symbol of the fish, the Christian fish symbol, that really sent him off? I remember that was it. Yeah, I have to go back and look at his story.
He had, yeah. Oh, do you know? Yeah, so he had he kind of attributed it possibly to the effects. So at that time he wasn't on amphetamines anymore. That was his addiction, was amphetamines. At one time he wasn't on amphetamines, but he'd gone to the dentist, I think earlier that day, and he was feeling maybe some effects from whatever they'd inject with him. Some woman came to the door. She had the wrong door, and she had a Jesus fish
Oh, that's it. Yeah.
pendant, and he said that's when the pink light beamed him. And that's where the fish. And then he found out that actually he's in the world's not real. He's in some kind of weird time loop there's like overlapping timelines. He's actually in the 3rd century or something, and he realized the Gnostics sort of were at the end of time, and the apocalypse really happened. Or these are among his interpretations of whatever was going on in his brain. But I mean, he clearly had something got triggered in his brain at this time, and it in some ways lasted till the end of his life when he suddenly died.
Right, and it reflects what's going on in this book, right? So it's his life, and then the whole larger culture and the social engineering of drugs, which are illegal but you can find everywhere, and the trap that people are in and can't get out of, and some die. I mean, that's the whole thing. Is this drug or whatever? What is it? It's Moore's ontological Roman god of death, right? So the counterpart of Thanatos. So I think that's the point that he's saying. Is like, you're locked into this thing of death. That's the real PsyOp in the real world, reflected in his book and film, which is also so people are going through this PsyOp in real time, that I think is reflected in the scanner directly. I can't see through it.
Yeah. A question for you, and to go back a little bit back to the rehab facility and the cult aspect you were alluding to. You mentioned World Vision, right? So was World Vision doing this kind of, because that's interesting, because Mark David Chapman, who got involved with World Vision, of course, which is also connected to Hinckley and his family, but Chapman, it was through his drug problems, essentially. His problems were with psychedelic. He was just frying his brain at like 15 years old with psychedelic drugs, and he ended up in some kind of YMCA thing, and then they got him into World Vision. Could you elaborate on that about World Vision?
Well, my feel of World Vision is that they have those kind of figures. They're fronts, they're CIA fronts. A lot of these help groups or UN things, or a lot of intelligence ties. So you have this kind of like what you see in this movie, the New Path guys, these kind of bureaucrats, lower level bureaucrats trying to get you into the system or suss you out. So I kind of got that feeling where New Path was like World Vision, was like Scientology, was like Synanon. And I think that is a reflection in the book, but I think that was what was happening at that time. I mean, I don't know what was the Hinckley shooting, were 80, 81. This book was in the 70s. So I think that was the atmosphere. That was the kind of NGO environment, was that there were these strange people with, helping people out of drugs, and this part of this book and the real world system of the thing. And I think that's probably how Chapman got brought into World Vision and Suspicious. And I vaguely back in the day read about the intelligence ties of World Vision. Like, it was Christian, but there were people associated with the intel community behind World Vision, if I remember correctly.
Oh, there's no question. Southeast Asia, that's not that's a mainline accepted fact. They were doing intelligence work in Southeast Asia during Vietnam. But what's being portrayed, it's like the same thing. If you've seen Inherent Vice, right? It's the same things going on there in a more esoteric way. But remember the rehab center there, which is like a cult programming center, with a multi-purpose sort of cult programming center. If you remember, it seems like the same kind of complex of the same kind of circular PsyOp is being portrayed there as well.
Right. And I think the book blurb for this book compares Dick to Pynchon, if I remember correctly. But it's interesting. Like, this is a more accessible vision of Pynchon's work. But yeah, no, I think that was the time back then. I think that there were all kinds of weird, like Scientology, NGOs. And if you look at Scientology, they had inordinate, just immense amount, thousands and thousands of weird front companies that they hid the actual name of Scientology from. So you could have like drug help centers, and they would be in, and you would think, oh, this is just an independent thing. And you get in there and find out, oh, this is just another Scientology front group getting money.
No,
and
I have
army
a yeah, I have an uncle who ran one of those centers,
Oh, interesting.
actually, and this was either late 80s, early 90s, and he had problems with drugs and alcohol, and eventually, like they had him running the center, but the thing is, he had stopped using drugs. I don't know what he was on, cocaine or whatever, but he just couldn't stop drinking, and he was even telling, it was the point where he was trying to get clean. He was saying, I really need some help, like, and they kept insisting to him that he didn't have a problem, but it was to the point where like he was so far gone that he would even acknowledge he had a problem. And he figured out later, I mean, it was a way to control him, and God knows what else they were doing, and finally he cut loose of them. But yeah, there's all kinds of weird things going on in those centers.
And that's the kind of weird distortment, is that I am here to help you, but in actuality I'm here to control you. And that may be the whole thing about the drug PsyOp story, is that the initial temptation is this is something that will expand your capacities, but in fact, over time, you become either dead or totally a slave to it, right? I mean, you become a slave to these drugs, whether it's alcohol or anything else. But those kind of intros to Scientology were much more common in the past. I recollect growing up. I grew up in Northern California. I remember seeing a lot of these things, and they were all Scientology, and they were looking for what did Hubbard famously said, need more meat, or need more flesh. Like that's the way he saw people coming into his organizations, was people that he could control and get money out of. So through whatever drug fronts or Scientology flat out, or all these things, you had to pay for everything, right? So
sorry, one quick Huxley connection. I was looking up Winona Ryder, and yeah, her parents have a very interesting background. So she was named after Winona, Minnesota. Ryder was given her middle name Laura because of her parents' friendship with Laura Huxley, writer Aldous Huxley's wife. Everybody's sus, actually, in this movie.
Yeah, there you go. Even more so, there's like pictures of her being kissed by Leary, who said he's carrying on Crowley's work, right? And her dad was Leary's archivist, so he was the one who collected all of Leary's stuff. So she's firmly in that Gnostic, New Age type of occultism from birth. But what did Leary like to repeat the whole Gnostic thing, that God is against you because he's keeping you from the tree of knowledge. So he would repeat that over and over again, but it's the Gnostic view where God is keeping you from enlightenment through knowledge instead of from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So it's a very convenient twist on that, but he should know better too. But he was friends with Huxley too. In my book, Children of the Beast, I have that conversation between him and Huxley before Huxley died. Easy date to remember, November 2nd, 22nd, 1963. But they're talking about whether LSD should be sent out to the public or kept in kind of special. Huxley took the kind of more elitist view, and Larry was the opposite of that. But that's an intel guy too. So you want to talk about intel and the cyclical nature of drugs and the capture of people and social engineering. I think in the real world that was real, and I think Philip K. Dick was capturing that in this Inner Darkling.
Yeah, and one thing I think about Dick that is interesting to think about in the context of his later indulgence in these drugs and everything that we're talking about is Jason Horsley has an article about Dick from some years ago, from like 2015. And I know Jason, in one of his next couple books in Big Mother, The Technology of Evil, will treat PKD at some length. So I'm sure that that'll cause me to think a lot deeper about some of these things that we're currently considering with him. But Jason wrote before about PKD probably being autistic, and that being a major influence on a lot of these concepts throughout different writings in PKD's career, and that comes out explicitly in a couple places like Martian Time Slip, where there's explicit portrayals and discussions of autism. But Jason, who's a self-diagnosed autistic as well, who's written about that very insightfully in ways that I very personally benefited from, as somebody who also considers himself on the autism spectrum, talks about the idea of just how fast time can move for the person on the spectrum, and how disorienting that can be, and how that can relate to all these sci-fi concepts that PKD is dealing with there, in these different novels and short stories, etc. And with these different portrayals of weird things going on with time or precognitive phenomena and all of that. And there's also other accounts that I've read that I find very persuasive that a lot of what was happening in terms of the high strangeness in Philip K. Dick's life was genuine precognition, which I do take to be a real phenomenon. I just don't think it has a spiritual significance that a lot of people who believe in it might ascribe to it. Like I was talking about earlier, I think it could be a distraction or a path to delusion or something that can even make you vulnerable to manipulation from both humans and non-humans. But we can think of maybe Philip K. Dick as somebody who has these different kind of traumas running throughout his life of being this socially maladapted autistic person. And then also, I mentioned the kind of twinning thing with first century Thomas that he thought he also was, but then also the death of his twin sister. They were born prematurely, and she died 6 weeks after their birth. That haunted him for the rest of his life as well. So you have that kind of lingering death of the twin and that survivor's guilt, just really imprinting on PKD psychologically. And so you have the kind of phantom twin motif through a lot of his writings because of that. So with all of that, I guess you could say it's no wonder that he would cling to these to these Gnostic spiritual experiences or ideas or these weird phenomena with time, or the idea of his books becoming real, or all of that, or even the drug use themselves, because these are all, I think, dissociations that can be used to protect him from these kind of traumas running throughout his life. And these are all things on a spiritual and socio-political level that can be manipulated, as we know, and engineered, as we see happening with MK culture. So I think that explains a lot of some of these basic dynamics with him as well.
I agree. I mean, he definitely plays with time, and all the time throughout. That's a theme of all of his books, not just this one. Is manipulating time, and so he may have had, whether it was the drugs or his sensibilities, but he acted like, I think he didn't keep relationships for very long, and was not maladapted is a good way to put it. But there's a lot. I mean, I think that he was a product of his time. I think that was the 70s. This was the roaring 70s, cocaine, speed, all that stuff was taking place. It was just after the 60s. So you had a lot of people who got wrecked. You can talk to people at that time. There was a lot of madness, schizo, paranoia. All those were, running through the culture at that time. So, do you guys have anything else? I mean, I'm kind of, I think it's an interesting book, and Dick is an interesting figure. I think he captured the paranoia and the tech kind of environment, at least one of the best of the science fiction writers, in as much as his books are science fiction.
Yeah, in his book, The Transmigration of Timothy Archer, there's some of the same kind of paranoia that's behind this. He said in I think a talk he gave at a sci-fi conference that he was it was the Nixon era and this climate of paranoia that pervaded the Berkeley counterculture. I think that's the comparison with Pynchon to an Inherent Vice and all that, and some of Pynchon's work too. Basically that same culture that we're talking about, a paranoia. But yeah, it's in that they're speculating about who so-and-so could be an agent for. And I mean, the historical background is, COINTELPRO, which was the FBI's program to infiltrate anti-war, Black Power, Black Panthers groups, and to turn them against each other, basically. And then the CIA had a parallel program called Chaos that was going on. So, I mean, that's part of the background to what's going on, what was feeding into the paranoia. I mean, I do have another question that I think is a big theme here, or it's not a big theme, but it's like a sub theme that we shouldn't ignore. But the scramble suit's supposed to mean something too, right? He's the ultimate everyman. Right. And it seemed to me that like there's no coincidence too that it's Keanu Reeves, right? Who's sort of the, how do you put? Yeah, he's the Hollywood Jesus, is what somebody's like to call him. But as such, he's a kind of blank slate sort of. I mean, the Matrix is his. Is kind of his flagship performance, because I think that's kind of what he represents in Hollywood and that. But it's so you're the ultimate everyman, but it sort of makes you no one as well, you know. And then there's this reference to DiCaprio in Catch Me If You Can, when the Woody Harrelson character Ernie is telling this story about this imposter who pretends to be a master imposter, which I think sort of captures the intersection between postmodern self-reflexivity and the mass intelligence culture stuff that I'm describing. And they kind of achieve this this synergy. But in that movie, Catch Me If You Can, you know, DiCaprio, it's this character kind of like the talented Mr. Ripley that Matt Damon played, just this kind of like The Passenger that Jack Nicholson did in the 70s. And well, Jack Nicholson did it as well, like in Five Easy Pieces. It's like this person who can be anyone, who has no real identity, right? Who's the perfect method actor in a way too. So this theme kind of struck me. I thought was worth asking you guys about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those kind of scramble suits, they're, in addition to just kind of playing into all the different layers of deception the movie is reveling in. I think, and the Keanu connection, like that, that's a good insight. That the ultimate everyman is him of all people. But yeah, it shows, I think, also what something you have there is the overlap between this scrambling of identity, these kind of schizo themes in terms of being functional and related to particular espionage tasks. Like they're doing it to provide cover for themselves, for all these different reasons related to their mission. So there's this idea of this kind of deception and breakdown of identity as part of the saturation of espionage stuff into the culture. And then you can see that can overlap with these kind of paranormal or occult fixations, where you have the simultaneous augmentation of the self, of the ego, to the entire cosmos. That's so much of what the New Agers talk about as being ego death, is simply like identifying yourself with everything and everyone in this very psychologically and metaphysically greedy way that also you can see eventually, when you dig further, becomes the absolute annihilation and sacrifice of the self, being everything and nothing in this very sinister sense. So I think you have that on both the espionage and the kind of metaphysical level there.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree that they're taking on this roles and losing their identity in this fake role. I think that's a theme throughout this book, if not all of Dick, is like, what's your real identity? So
I think I want to say to Keanu, I guess, to clarify the point, like he's the Hollywood Jesus in the sense that, like, he's Neo, right? He's the new man. He's the archetype of the new man. This being a great, project of modernity, of the communists and everybody else to create the new man, the new type of man. And here, like, who is the new man, right? Is he's a victim of a circular PsyOp. So I think that's part of why Keanu. Be very suspicious of Keanu roles from Matrix on, because I think many of them are part of this kind of programming.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about the John Wick movies at some point, Brett. I haven't thought about those in relation to our themes. Those would be interesting to tackle. I know I've just started seeing advertisements for the 4th installment. One other movie connection with this is that this comes out a year after Batman Begins, and this is more just a kind of synchronistic resonance rather than than a purposeful reference, because the character, the Keanu character in the film, his character in the book, is also called Bruce in the PKD book at the end when he's at the New Path facility. But in Batman Begins, which is a movie that's pretty important to the overall coming together of PsyOp cinema analysis, since we analyzed it so early on when we were putting out episodes. There's the blue flower that has this drug effect that causes these traumatic hallucinations, and then you have the blue flower at the end of this one, which creates substance D, and so I don't know. I was thinking that one, Bruce Wayne, and this one, the character also being named Bruce. This movie coming out a year later, so just a little bit of a somewhat synchronistic connection there.
Yeah, but it also has that everyman quality, like the names that Dick selected: Hank, Bob, right? These very working class kind of
one syllable working class unremarkable names. Yeah, for sure. A couple other notes I have. One, I just have to say, Brett earlier mentioned the Alex Jones scene, and I can't over exaggerate the amount of physical relief that I was flooded with when I saw Alex Jones on screen, just as this voice in the wilderness, as Brett said. The whole movie is so oppressive to watch, and so to have AJ come in and to start just like screaming truth for like 30 seconds was something that helped get me through the film. Not to put AJ on too much of a pedestal, but I will defend him and not disavow him as many other conspiracy analysts do. But then something else, just about PKD's career, the fact that the 1972 letter that he wrote to the FBI claiming to have been contacted, by somebody who was trying to get him to put coded novels in his work, that obviously I think is very important, very interesting, very telling. Whatever was actually going on there, it certainly works with all of these themes. But then about Linklater and about the movie, I find it interesting that the person who wrote a screenplay for Scanner Darkly that was never that was never produced, I think he wrote it in the late 90s. What was Charlie Kaufman, who's a very different kind of filmmaker, very different figure than Richard Linklater. But I guess it kind of makes sense that both these guys would be interested in Scanner Darkly and PKD. A lot more of Kaufman's work as a screenwriter and director reflects the PKD style themes than Linklater's does. Like a lot of stuff like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and other things that Kaufman wrote have much more of an obvious PKD kind of flair to them. But I find Kaufman pretty detestable at this point, and I'm very embarrassed I ever enjoyed his work. I find it very grimy and self-indulgent and not insightful at all. Even though some of it might be slightly well crafted, but the overlap between Kaufman and Linklater is that they both try to often portray like what you could say mundane interactions and bring a significance to them that you might not otherwise see in a lot of films. But in Kaufman, this is done in a very miserable way with a lot of fanciful conceits behind them. Whereas typically in Linklater, you have this kind of joy in the mundane and it's done in a very ordinary way. But apparently Kaufman's script deviated from the novel a lot more than Linklater's did. I haven't read Kaufman's script, but there's some other references in Kaufman's work to PKD style stuff. I think there's a Blue Flower that's pretty big in the film adaptation, and also a reference one of the characters makes to a screenplay that they've done that has some similarities to Scanner Darkly, broadly speaking. So there's just want to note that about Kaufman there. And then about Linklater, I said some of this at the beginning, but we talked about this some last time. But I'll emphasize the fact that Linklater just disavowed Alex Jones the second that Alex Jones became unacceptable to say anything good about him speaks a lot about the trajectory of Linklater's career and the presentation of his worldview. But even in some of these recent these recent films like Boyhood or Everybody Wants Some that I mentioned, you can see why somebody like Linklater would be seduced by the darker parts of MK culture. Boyhood, this kind of the kind of meaninglessness of everyday existence. Like he's trying to basically, this very in this one interview with Matthew McConaughey is interviewing Linklater, and they're talking about the end of Boyhood, where the couple characters smoke weed, and one says, everyone's always saying seize the moment, but I think it's the other way around. The moment seizes us. And then the main character, the boy that we followed, watched grow into adulthood, says, it's like always right now. Just this really trite stuff that's supposed to be very profound. And another scene in that movie where the main character, the boy, asks his dad, what's the point? And then his dad tells him, I sure as shit don't know. Neither does anyone else. We're all just winging it. The good news is that you're feeling stuff. You got to hold on to that. And basically Linklater says, that's basically his worldview. He says it's a little Eastern, a little Buddhist, but pretty non-denominational. So again, just like this really silly, spiritual, but not religious, normie worldview of, no one knows what's going on, but I guess but I guess it's just, you live in the moment, or let the moment seize you, and that's meaning in itself. And so with that in mind, you could see how some of these stoner philosophy, preoccupations that Linklater lets into some of his movies could lead to these much darker MK culture spaces. Like I was thinking about Everybody Wants Some, and I was like, oh, it's such an innocent movie, just all these bros hanging out, and you're just watching them have fun conversations. And then I remember like, oh, there's a scene where there's like copious references to The Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland within like 5 minutes of each other. Another scene where they're smoking weed and talking about telepathy and shamanism and stuff. So I don't think that Linklater is malicious, but with those things in mind and Scanner Darkly in mind, it just really shows the vulnerability of trite normie worldviews into being seduced by things that are much darker.
Yeah, no, you're right. You see that clarity in this from his early films and the treatment of A Scanner Darkly too, right? Like just all the talking, druggy talking that goes on in this movie that I didn't need to have like 45 minutes of it, of them, druggedly talking about each other, going on adventures or whatever. It's just like too much. But I guess that comes out of Linklater's. I think that he overemphasized that in the movie. He probably didn't have to, in my view. We're at about, let's see, where are we at? We're at 80 minutes. Do you guys have any final finishing statements or anything I missed or anything you want to add?
Well, I mean, there was a little bit of occult kind of stuff in the movie. I mean, you see like Downey Jr. is very conspicuously wearing the all-seeing eye shirt, and then the next time we see him, he's going total Providence. Eye of Providence, and I mean, it looked like a Masonic G that you see in the living room. I don't know if it was you really couldn't tell. It was but it's a big G in the middle. It certainly could be. Certainly could be read like that. There's a few other ones. I was going to just to gloss the Batman blue flower thing. In both, it's interesting too. In both cases, in this movie, Scanner Darkly, and in Batman Begins, the blue flower is associated with you might call it a bad drug, and it's these drug horror. I mean, both Batman Begins and this movie kind of is drug horror, and Batman Begins, like the last act, is very much like a drug horror film in a lot of ways. So also, I'm glad Thomas has seen the light on Charlie Kaufman. That's exactly my sentiments on Kaufman. I don't know. Let me see if I have. I think that's pretty much.
Did you notice, talking about symbols, did you notice the two rackets up on the wall too? Isn't that like some other symbol? I've seen it somewhere else. I can't remember.
Well, we're talking about the bear thing too. So it's I quote the IMDb trivia here. Noticed all the bears. The theme of bears can be noticed in the film. The meeting at the start is of the Brown Bear Lodge, California state flag with the bear on it, is seen in Arctur's house. Arctur's name appears to be derived from Ursus Arctos, the scientific name for the brown bear, and from the star Arcturus, located in the Boötes constellation, which is also known as the bear keeper or herder. So is there an astrological thing going on there? Not really sure.
No, the two rackets is from the intro to Eyes Wide Shut. That's right. There's like a symbol of the two rackets there too. I forgot about that.
Yeah, I sometimes look at I do a lot of sort of IMDb networking research, but I need to start looking more at production designers and people, because like I guess of at least one movie, Batman, Nolan used Nathan Crowley as a production designer, and someone under him is responsible for creating some of the alleged predictive programming stuff in The Dark Knight Rises. So yeah, looking at some of the folks who do the props, because I think that Linklater is not a puppeteer like director. Linklater is not Stanley Kubrick. In fact, I think Linklater is not making the kind of films anymore he was really kind of good at making. So yeah, I mean, I don't think the stuff even comes from Linklater is my guess.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, and then I guess just to conclude, I guess I would just reiterate that the ambiguous feelings I have towards PKD were rather solidified by looking at this book and movie and this discussion. I think he's a very tragic victim of MK culture who tried to claw his way out of the labyrinth and couldn't quite get there, but isn't a villain. But certainly his work should be looked at with a lot of scrutiny and should be handled with a lot of caution, because I think that there's a lot of traps there unintentionally. And my view of Linklater certainly has gotten a bit dimmer from watching this film. But hey, I'm glad that there was the Alex Jones scene in there. Like, I really love the end of his rant. Stop selling out your own species. That's something to be remembered.
That's a good one. Yeah. Stop selling out your own species is a good one to end it on. I mean, I think my full take is that PKD was reflecting in his book his own tragedy, that he went mad and brain misfired. And it's in this book too. It's like the dual brain. And I think that's I mean, he finishes it in the book, and the movie finishes it with all the people who didn't make it, either died or were ruined by the culture they were involved in. I think that's the ultimate warning. And that's the ultimate warning of the PsyOp of the larger culture and the film and book is don't get involved. I mean, you just hear all these tragic stories of people. You're like, I thought I was getting something good out of this. Now I'm controlled. And I think that that's really the subtext of the book and film, is that they are under control of a malevolent force in this substance death. So that would be my take. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's great to talk with you. You guys are super smart, and the themes are great. And I really appreciate all the input you have. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, William. Always fun to come on your show.
Thank you, William.
All right, take care. Stay there.
Bye-bye.
Stay there.